Welcome,
My
everyone.
name is Jakob. I'll be moderating today. And for those who are new to CareerFoundry, we create career change programs in technical subjects like UX design, UI design, web development, and data analytics. Today I'm joined by Olga, one of our user interface design mentors. And Olga will be reviewing UI design portfolios live on air, which is pretty awesome. You can actually submit your own design portfolio for Olga to review. You can do that in public chat, and if you want to be a bit more private, you can do it in the Q&A chat. So if you're a designer or thinking about becoming a designer and maybe you have some portfolio already, just drop us in a link and I'll pass it on to Olga. But before we start, I have a couple of questions for Olga. So I thought we can start with introductions. So Olga, please introduce yourself.
Gladly. Thank you. And welcome, everyone. Yeah, I've been doing product design for the last 10 years. I've been also being highly responsible for hiring and scaling a design team in my past. One of the things I would like to share with you is actually about those statistics, and so that you can also have a glimpse of the possibilities and chances of getting hired when you submit your work into a company. We will definitely be focusing on UI design, although I've been doing both UI and UX throughout my career. This webinar is specifically dedicated to UI design portfolios, visual designers, etc., dedicated to tech, naturally. So is there anything else that you would like to know, Jakob?
I guess since we're talking about portfolios today, could you please let us know why designers should have a portfolio?
Mm-hmm. So a portfolio is your window into a little bit of a glimpse of how you work and what kind of work you did in your past. So that will be the best way for a hiring manager to understand if your skill set fits what the company is looking for and if you will be up to the challenge of joining that team and tackling the challenges from that team later on.
So you've interviewed obviously many designers in your career. What are you looking for in a portfolio?
I look for opportunities to understand how that designer is thinking. What are what is the designer top skills? What are they good at? What are their strengths? And visually, are they actually proficient in terms of visual design as well? Do they understand typography? Do they understand how to use colors? And do they understand patterns of digital design? Things like are their target sizes big enough for the buttons, for all the clickable elements, etc.
And I think just before we start, a lot of our students actually ask how many projects should they feature in a portfolio. So if you're a hiring manager and if you're hiring a junior UI designer, how many projects should these people have in their portfolios?
I would say it's more about quality than quantity. So I've seen students graduating and getting hired just with 3 to 4 projects in their portfolios. I've also seen portfolios with more work, which definitely showcases different things. But then you also run into the risk of those some of those portfolio pieces might not be as good as others, and you might run into the risk of the hiring manager opening and actually sticking to the ones that are not as good as you might have in other cases. Besides, something that I really loved to hear earlier in my career or read somewhere was that your portfolio is only as good as your worst piece, as your worst project. Meaning that if you have an excellent portfolio, but there's something that really throws people off, people will be very skeptical and even asking themselves, why is that in there? And why are the other projects so good compared to that one that is so a little bit mediocre or terrible?
Great. Thanks, Olga. I'm sure there will be some more questions happening during the workshop. So for now, I'll let you take it away. For those who just joined, Olga, one of our UI design mentors, is live reviewing UI design portfolios. If you have a design portfolio and if you'd like Olga to review it, please post a link in the public chat or in the Q&A, and I'll pass the link to Olga. This workshop will take approximately 1 hour, so we'll be here until 7 p.m. Berlin time, and we'll try to review as many portfolios as possible. So we already had a couple of submissions, so I'll just let Olga take it away. Thanks.
Thank you, Jakub. Before we start with sharing my screen, I would actually just throw some numbers out there. So some years back, I was responsible for hiring and scaling a design team. And I would like to share some of these statistics for those of you who might not be changing your career and might not be not have so much experience interviewing for digital designer positions. Mainly because this might help you understand how to deal with recruiting better during your recruiting processes. So my junior and mid-level UI numbers for you are the following. Over the 11 months, I reviewed 30 portfolios. Actually more than 30 portfolios. I interviewed out of those 15 candidates, and we ended up hiring 3 designers out of these, specifically UI designers. All of them stayed in a company for at least a year, which is a good quality, means that we did a good hire. And I also want to say that you might be doing your math and saying, okay, you'll hire 10% of the numbers of people who actually submitted, but that's naturally not the case, because there's always a HR filtering, which does the CV check, initial call, to kind of check on your, very much to get a glimpse on your communication English skills. So usually the hiring rate is below, or is below 10%, usually between 5 to 10% after the HR check. So keep that in mind when you apply for jobs. Consider that even if you apply for a lot of companies, the chances are pretty low that you will get hired there. So keep applying and keep trying on new companies, and the more practice you will have, also the better opportunities there will be. I'm not sure you can see my screen because it says that the sharing is on. Okay, now I can see it. Sorry. So yeah, let's move on with the first couple of portfolios that I got from CareerFoundry here. So we'll start with Thuraya. I do see that it's a Adobe portfolio. Seems like pretty clear, structured, organized. There's nothing really that calls my attention to be excellent or special, but it's also not in a negative way. So it's good that things are organized, and there aren't really that many projects. I can have a glimpse into it. There might be a little bit of dispersity in terms of how these projects are presented. Maybe a little bit of consistency will be useful. Although I see very different projects, I see some e-commerce, I see some home service app, something related to food, and a note-taking app. And then I see user psychology analysis, which immediately throws me off a little bit, saying like, maybe this is not really a UI designer portfolio, but a UX portfolio. But let's go into each one of these and see what it takes. I tend to open my portfolio projects in tabs so that I can actually navigate through them and then close the ones that I'm not so interested in. One thing that I personally don't understand, which is the latest trend of putting all the screens tilted, especially when you start with this, I immediately start hurting my neck because I kind of end up reviewing your work like this, and I hope that this work will be displayed bigger somewhere later. So I kind of end up trying to find it. Nevertheless, since this is the first impression that I get, I immediately want to see the details and I start looking for them. But the way that the screens are displayed in isometric view, it breaks the purpose of actually letting me see the details and the icons and everything that you designed so perfectly. Then I also noticed some inconsistencies. So there's a different color for this button and this button, or it seems to me that there's a different color, that this is a little bit lighter and this is much more saturated. So there are plenty of details that immediately jump into my attention. So that I would like to see some consistency, especially if you put those screens together, make sure that they are consistent. Then there's interesting to see what happened, what was the scope of this project. Perhaps this could be designed in a different way, in the sense of it's not just plain text that kind of lists it in a non-visual way, in a certain way. It is clear to read, yes, but perhaps this could be organized somehow differently. Maybe there's some of this information that is more important that could be more highlighted, maybe in a larger font size, etc. Then I see a huge title saying "Building a Cohesive Brand," but then I'm curious to what makes it cohesive in the first place. What is here that is cohesive, and also beyond that, why are these elements so small? Because I can't really see it very well. Also keep in mind that your resolution of this image is actually smaller than, or less sharp than, the rest of the site, which is, I can see that this text is quite crisp on my Retina screen, but everything else is a little bit pixelated. When I start looking into details, I realize that there are even some mistakes. So for example, there's like H3. Make sure that you don't have absolutely no mistakes in your portfolio, because people will notice those, and if they notice, it's not as good for you anymore. There are also some things that are cut out, looks a little bit nasty in a certain way. As a UI designer, you want to be pixel perfect. You want to be, everything needs to be placed in the right place for a reason. And that's really, really important, because that's exactly what I expect from a designer, from a visual designer doing UI design. Then I see user flow, which also makes me question, why is home somewhere hidden in the middle? Then why do we go straight to browse and not to home? There's a lot of question marks, but because this is also UX related, I kind of skip it. But then if you're not excellent at UX, maybe skip that altogether. Then regarding these screens, something that caught my attention was that even though this looks in a lower fidelity, as it mentions here, when I start looking into details of the work itself, they are pretty much at the same level. It doesn't really indicate me anything extra besides that there's some text here, which is exactly what this sketch communicates here as well. Even this filter screen tells me more than this specific screen over here. So I would actually not call this mid-fidelity. I would probably even get rid of it altogether, because this is what it looks like mid-fi to me. There are some elements that are defined. The icons might not be final, and there are no images and there are no colors. So this is definitely mid-fi for me. And then the final design, or high fidelity screens, would be something that I would like to see larger. If you spend the work designing greatly, you're taking care of all the details in your UI, show them to me. This is something that I really would like to see. Then beyond there, I start looking at the color of usage. So there are some really bright reds being used here that might be a little bit too harsh, in a sense, that might be a little bit too aggressive. As a UI designer, again, I would expect to tone your colors, tone your elements for them to be pleasant to see and not really jump straight out of the screen. It might seem to be a little bit more like a marketing presentation rather than made by a UI designer. Then regarding responsive design, and I've seen lots of mockups being used, and also specifically this mockup, I can barely see the design itself. There's a really huge photo, but then the design is so tiny that I can't really see the details there. So it feels a little bit like a missed opportunity. Then it's nice to have animations. It's really positive if those animations show something really different. If it's just slide in, slide out, I'm not really sure it adds a lot. You're actually making me see something, spending time to go through an animation that just shows scroll and things that you could actually show in static screens. Besides, when I saw this, and I actually had to go back and realize, because it looked like a bug, it looked like something wasn't properly adjusted. But then in reality, it's just an overlay that was a little bit like doesn't have enough spacing around white space. It feels a little bit broken in a certain way. So take care of those details. Look at how other stores do. Maybe in an app, this will even make sense to have an overlay, a full screen overlay. So if you go to your bag, you actually go to the full screen bag rather than just a strange overlay there. Okay, then going through other specifics in this project. Also, I see lots of extra elements that might be necessary. So things like this background already has a texture, then there's a blur, then there's a shape, and then inside this shape there's another color element like the color. So there's a little bit of extra elements. So simplify, make it simpler. And ultimately careful with the color usage. This light blue on orange, it actually hurts looking at because of the color contrast. So there was a color webinar that we did previously with CareerFoundry that I would recommend to watch about this specific case as well there. More things that I've realized here was the specific Note app, not because of the Note app itself, but because of the way it was shown here. Sorry. The fact that you show me 3 times the same thing, and two of them are blurred, and it doesn't really add a lot. Perhaps less is more, and especially considering that it was less is mentioned here. I would recommend to actually think of less in the first place and display it here as well. And consider as well, again, the target size of the elements. This is great for this is great for a mouse click, but maybe in an app, this will be quite easy to misclick because these elements are too close to each other and a fingerprint needs much larger size to be able to access. Got a couple of questions from Jakob here on the chat. So which platform would you recommend to create a portfolio site? I see lots of designers using templates from website builder like Adobe Portfolio, Squarespace. Is it okay to use templates rather than creating your own? It depends, right? It depends on who the hiring manager and what their thoughts are on this. In my specific case, I care about the quality of the work first. If the quality work is good, plus the designer went through the extra step of adding, having a website that is custom, like I see, for example, here in the second portfolio that we'll review next, then it's already a plus. But if there is an extra website, but the quality of work is not up to the level, don't really spend the effort. Even something sent in Behance would be good enough in order to be in order for you to get hired, provided that your work quality is good. Then when I refer to project, does it need to be a professional project, or could it be projects such as schoolwork or something created on my free time? I have no formal experience or anything to create a professional portfolio. Any tips for this? Of course, you not always will have professional work, especially at the start of your career. I spent plenty of time going to hackathons earlier in my product design experience. I used plenty of that work into my portfolio, and it was always seen as great, as also not only a proof of my work, but also proof of my interest, that I would spend my weekends working on hackathons rather than walking and having drinks with my friends, right? So that's always valuable. And of course, real work experience is important because you always want to have that in your CV. But for portfolio, that is not as important, provided that you show actually great work there and it's consistent. Don't overdo it. So if you have like 10 different projects, you don't have to show all of them. Show what is really relative, what is really important there. Okay, moving on with the next portfolio, and I've seen plenty of portfolios being thrown next. I will just open some of them here for us to cover later. So yeah, let's go with Sinem, who has a great start telling me that she's Berlin-based. And it's like, okay, maybe my company is in Berlin, and that will be already a big plus. Or maybe my company is Amsterdam, and I will be thinking maybe Sinem wants to relocate. And so that really gives me a little bit of a glimpse. Something that I would immediately think is, does this designer understand about color contrast? Because this color is a little bit too close to the white, or doesn't have enough color contrast. Although as soon as I scroll, I understand that there is much more contrast here. But when I start, this is my first impression. So I would suggest perhaps to tone a little bit in a darker tone here, and maybe add a hover effect when I post over. Because I've seen that this, since we got this portfolios earlier, I did my inspect in my code. Since I had a little bit more time to review this, I've seen that it's made in WordPress. So it's actually a good effort to kind of differentiate yourself. Okay, going through the website itself, I see plenty of work. I see some of them being more highlighted than others, which makes me curious. Maybe this is kind of work that is more important. And I also see a nice about me with a downloadable resume and some personal preferences of what this designer does on her free time, as well as testimonials. I love this. This is really great. I once had a student who would pick on from the video reviews that I would make from his work. He would pick on some quotes and put this throughout of course, after asking me for if he could use those quotes, he put this in his final portfolio as quotes from a senior designer, which is pretty smart. It actually gives recognition in a very clever way. And this is actually fantastic. I would also maybe even recommend to add a link to your LinkedIn, saying like more on LinkedIn. This is something that I also did on my landing page earlier on, with after 3 testimonials from other people that I actually didn't even had on LinkedIn, which is fantastic. And then a nice contact form. Cool. Really consistent icons. I like this quite a lot. I was a little bit confused by working hours. So like, yeah, wouldn't expect you to work in the middle of the night, but what does that mean? That if I sent you an email at, I don't know, 7 a.m., you will only reply at 9? I would question if that's even important. I'm not really sure this is actually relevant, because hiring managers also don't normally work on Saturday and Sunday, and off these hours. So that will be a little bit, not really sure it was necessary, but maybe you wanted to fill this with the 4th icon, which I also don't see the point. But okay, moving on, let's go through the projects. Looking into what was highlighted. Again, I see these like not 3D, but isometric representations that are super trendy nowadays without much purpose. And also beyond that, I see lots of repetition, right? Like this screen, yes, the number looks different from this number, but it's the same screen. What's the point? It's like adding a lot of stuff. It feels like fake show off, right? In a sense that, oh, I showed you a lot of stuff, but in reality, there isn't a lot of stuff. It's just the same thing repeated with different images and different numbers. So it kind of feels a little bit not really honest, in my opinion. But okay, I understand that it's a trend, so I don't really reject it, although it's super annoying, in my opinion. Then I see a little bit more of the same that I said for Thuraya, about the fact that there's nothing really highlighted. Everything seems to be important. Although what I like here is that not the name of the project is highlighted, but what this project is about, which perhaps could be more important because the name is already there. It's already on the screen. Okay, then we go through there are some guiding principles, great. Some what to do, what not to do with the logo. Okay, I see lots of focus on branding, which is also good, how the colors are used. Then I see this element here, which I don't really see on the UI, right? If we go through the screens, where is that? If you use it only for the logo, that is just an SVG or SVG or PNG there. It's not really used anywhere in your UI. You don't really use that cursive kind of a handwritten style font. So perhaps that should not even be in your style guide if it's just a logo. Then we have image style, looks coherent. Okay, then I would say the illustration style doesn't look coherent because you have lots of flat colors here. You have only one color and no elements inside, but then here you use lots of gradients here as well. So there's quite a dispersity of communication of style that is really not consistent. So I would like this to be a little bit more standardized. And I know the illustration is hard. I'm totally aware of that. But the fact that you put it all together and make it kind of emphasize on it, it stands out as something that you're calling my attention to something that is not perfect. So perhaps it should not be highlighted if it's not perfect in the first place. User flow diagram, this is pretty much unreadable. Yes, I understand that you're a UI designer and you don't want to talk a lot about UX, but then either you show it in a way that is readable, because you're a UI designer, you're supposed to make things readable, or you completely dismiss it. Same here, I want to see this larger. There's usually a good balance of emphasizing more, less the low fidelity, a little bit more the high fidelity, the mid fidelity, sorry, and then the final screens emphasizing even larger, so making them really with appropriate size to be watched. Then we see some tests, more mockups, and then here finally we got to the final screen. So great, why are we calling them mockups? Well, this is basically final screens. And I see a little bit of abuse in terms of gradients, in my opinion. I think these buttons could be flat like they are here. So I'm not really sure. There's like 3 different styles. One is, this looks like secondary and primary, but then there's an additional button here that looks slightly different. Okay, I'll move on to the next portfolio. Before, just since I opened this large project, let's go through it quickly. There was a little bit of this duality of what is important here, because this icon actually calls a lot of attention. I would tone it down. Maybe it doesn't need to be that such dark black. It could be very much disappear in the background. It could still be there, but not be so prominent. Because what you want to focus on is actually on the screen, which is what's your work is, what's more important. Show some process. That's great. Mood boards. Again, lots of fonts. I'm not really sure this was just a selection from what you picked on, but again, you first emphasize the cursor fonts, which I start questioning, and as I've seen this portfolio earlier, I started questioning if you would design a product without using a cursive font in the first place, because there are way too many cursive fonts. Well, you still end up not using it. So in this case, I would just put these into middle or even last. Perhaps somewhere in the middle, so they're a little bit like they disappear a little bit, so they're not the first element that is seen over here. Okay, moving on to the next portfolio, and I see also a question over here. I'm training to be UX designer first, UI secondary. Would you expect the UX designer portfolio to be as pixel perfect as a UI designer's portfolio? Absolutely not. Although this should not be the focus of this webinar, I would expect the UX designer to show process, research, and other things that the UI designer might not be so focused on. So definitely not. If you want to be a product designer, then you definitely should have both perfect. So depends on what you're looking for exactly. Okay, then moving on with Risa, or Risa, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Also from Berlin. We might be all neighbors. Then I see interesting color combination tries to calm me down, smooth, soft. I usually try to also read a lot about the personality of a designer through their portfolio. So if you're bold and loud, don't give me a portfolio like this, because, or your CV designed in a very calm colors, because that will be quite that will be a little bit of a clash in a certain way. Communicate who you are. That would be the best. Okay, moving through here, I see very little project, which is actually good. I will not spend so much time looking into them and still be able to see the quality of your work. For me, that's a plus. Let's go through. I like the initial cover that kind of tries to simplify the work, although again, it kind of get lost a little bit in the, because when you start to putting everything into like trying to put more, you end up having less, right? If you put more elements into one image, nothing ends up being important. The thing that is more important here is actually the logo, because it's the largest things, which I would question. Is it really that important? Perhaps having one screen coming up here would actually be more interesting. Make me curious. I want to see what is this project about. This is what you want to have with your landing, with not the landing, with your cover on the very top. Make me curious to continue scrolling. This is what you should aim for. All right, I see that you're using Figma, Figmotion, Usability Hub. Great. So just the fact that some icons were used, my attention was thrown right there right away, as you see. That's the first thing I see. I kind of get to know what kind of tools you use, which is okay. Not really sure if the duration for me is important. Maybe perhaps how many hours, how many days, or in time, how much it took you to do this could be more interesting than the timeline. Well, because this doesn't really tell me a lot. It's like, does it mean that you spend this time only designing? Does it take into account implementation? What does that mean? Okay, then there is, again, a little bit of more of the same that I mentioned before. There's lots, not a lot of text, but there's nothing really highlighted. This is interesting. Maybe I will be interested in seeing reading this in more detail after I skim through the visual work. If I have time for it, of course, during my workday. I start seeing some issues in terms of how these screens were placed together. I see some black bars over here right away. That I zoom in and I see that this is an issue. There's even a cutout here. So there's something strange with the export here, which again calls my attention to design in the details of this work. Nice, clean persona poster. It's a little bit strange that the person is kind of backwards against the content, but it's okay that at least the face is the eye gaze. It directs my attention to the content, so it's good. Not really sure about this color combination. I would perhaps use an outline instead of, or suggest to use an outline instead of a gray element here. So just a tiny white outline would perhaps be more in line with what you have here, since you also have some lines over here. Nice user journeys. This is great, not often seen as well, so I think that's good to highlight. User flow diagram looks very, very complex. Looks like what my developers end up doing of all the, is the user sign up? Yes, no, is then if no goes there, and if yes goes there, and if users forgot password. It seems very complex. I normally would only like to see the real screens on the user flow diagram and not really the functions. I see this in my students also very frequently. They end up putting the logout button just because it's in the profile. They end up putting it in the same style as all the other screens, which is just the same similar box, while it's just a button in the logouts page, in the profile page, right? So there should be just an arrow from the profile page to the sign up or to the landing landing page, not landing again, a launch screen. So that will be something that I would like to have clarity on. If people present user flow diagrams, I would like them to understand them in more detail. But it's good that you at least understand that user flow diagram is important to think through and develop a design product. Okay, then I see very interesting thoughts in a sense that if you click here, go here. If you click here, go here. Stuff like this. This is very useful and tells me a lot about thought process and how you design, which is great. Then I move on to mood board. I see there are 2 mood boards. And but although they still use the same button colors, so I'm not really sure what that exactly means. So perhaps the buttons should actually reflect the mood board as well, which they do here, but they not as much here. Then we have clear style guide. That's good. Something that is also useful is where that text is being used. So what are H2s, H3s, H4s? Although here still seems okay and good to understand, pretty much understandable. Then we see plenty of details and buttons, and perhaps it will be useful to know what these all button variations mean, when to use what. If you develop a style guide for developers to implement, they will also want to know when to use which button. Also, other designers that might end up working in the project or product in the future. Okay, then some loading animations, searching. This might be a little bit crazy. If something is always rotating in the screen, might get users a little bit dizzy. Then, so I would probably tone it down a little bit or make it a little bit slower in that sense. All right, I'm already at the end, which, as you saw, I was starting to scroll pretty quickly because like I'm done with this project. It's already seen too much. It took me too long. Then it's more of the same. It will be also a good idea to have some projects that are longer, some projects that are shorter, because otherwise everything is about process. As I see here, I start thinking if you're really a UI designer or UX designer, because everything seems to be more about process and personas and read file and stuff like this. So maybe some of the products could be less about the UX side of it. Moving on. Are you looking mostly for reasons to move forward or mostly for reasons to filter out candidates? Put another way, should I have a large portfolio in order to have at least one thing resonate, or a small portfolio to reduce the chance something will be a red flag? I would say smaller is better, because as long as it's dedicated to that specific company that you're going for. Pretty much, if you're applying to a company, your portfolio is completely off, then rather have a diverse portfolio. But if you're applying for a company that, for example, is e-commerce, and you have like two or three portfolio projects, one of them is about e-commerce, you have higher chances, in my opinion. And again, I'm just one of plenty of people that might be recruiting, and other people might have different opinions. But in my opinion, I will focus more on that e-commerce project rather than being completely lost the myriad of projects that you'll have in your portfolio. Let's look at what Michelle has to show us. And I do see a nice intro. It's personal, it's nice. It shows me some mock-ups or wireframes. But it's okay. It's like I'm not immediately thrown out just because this is more UX, because I understand that it might get very heavy if something is more about colors and final UI. So it's also fine. This is nice, getting very personal and more approachable. Nice cover, very clean, lots of space, even though there's all these standing lane playing in different directions, a little bit like what I mentioned before. At least they're big enough. And the one that is on the back is not really showing anything, so it's not really hiding any content. So there's only like a login or a launch screen, welcome screen, not launch. I keep calling them launch, but it's welcome screen. Apologies for that. And and something else in the middle of the app. So it's nice. Okay, I see that there's some sort of task lists. I'm curious to see more. I wonder if this space is intentional, because it kind of, the margins are not too big, but they're also not like, for such a tiny margin, I would rather completely remove the margin altogether. But yeah, so it feels a little bit tight in a sense here, but at least you're using your space quite largely, which is great. The only problem with that is that this element end up being cut, and then there's a slight kind of margin here, which is kind of strange. Very minimal color usage, really like that, and there's like noticeably an accent color or an arrow color. Let's see, how is that being used? It's definitely an accent color from the illustrations. Icons are, from what I see here, material design. So it's like, does it worth, if you didn't design your icons on your own, or at least didn't add lots of custom icons on your own that are consistent with your material icons, not really sure it's worth it. Because what you're telling me is, yes, I can download icons from material design website, which is like, doesn't really tell me about your skills as a UI designer. Then again, we go through these with my neck hurting. What I see right away, nothing really stands out in a negative way, which is good. I'm not really sure why this button is a gradient, because everything else seems pretty flat, even the illustrations from what I've seen here. Yeah, they seem flat. And also this button has a bit of a gradient. Okay, I would like to see these screens flat so I can see the details actually. This could be an outro, right? It could be in the end. You can finish with this, but show me your screens flat so I can see into their details better and not completely distorting. You do end up using way more colors that you say that you use, so this is a bit tricky. Be mindful of that. Then moving on. Okay, that was a quick project. That was good. That was definitely UI. This is definitely very different in the sense that it has a lot more treatment. In a sense, it's not as minimal, it's not as simple, but not in a negative way. It's good to see some variety in that sense as well. This is a little bit too saturated, probably, in my opinion. This was great. It has lots of detail, and on the other way, it's not too much detail like in here. Because here there's detail, there's outlines, there's gradients, there's colors, there's lots of stuff going on. This color is a little bit on the edge of being too aggressive, especially on this blue background. Maybe it is a little bit aggressive. It plays a little bit, and like starts flickering, blue on red on blue. It does work on everywhere else though, so I think it's just a matter of not really using it with this background. So yeah, I see quite a lot of boldness, which goes really in contrast with the previous portfolio. I see that you definitely like to reuse red, or at least you start thinking in color much earlier, which is also a good sign, but I will see that in the other project. I will see that in the other project. And then, moving on. Okay, that was a quick project. That was good. That was definitely UI. I see quite a lot of boldness, which goes really in contrast with the previous portfolio. I see that you definitely like to reuse red, or at least you start thinking in color much earlier, which is also a good sign, but I will see that in the other project. And I see lots of process. Let's look into visual skills. This color really throws me off, being used on this background. There's quite a lot of stuff here. There's a search and there's a current location. I'm not really sure how these elements play together. Also, there's an X when there's nothing here. Maybe it's current selection. You can clear the current location, but then what does the search do here? Perhaps this should be removed. I don't know. There's a lot of things happening in one single place. Yeah, overall, I think this project actually kind of stands out as being very different from the previous one. So it tells me that you are don't really have one single style, which I see it as a good thing. Other people see it not as a good thing. I see that you can adapt to the needs of the product needs, and design for the brand, for that brand specifically. This might be a little bit strange for some people, might get into their primitive brain and be a little bit throw off. But looking at the design itself, so far I've only seen process, more of the kind of the same style which I've seen previously on the previous project, and again lots of process. And finally I get to the final screens. They are super small. Again, I want to see detail. I want to see your icons. I don't want to be zooming in into them to see them in detail. I feel that there's a lot, all right, what I'm seeing is there's a lot of people that I feel like they're afraid of or shy of showing their work because they keep putting their screen super small. And here again, you really seem to like red quite a lot, because this is like out of 4 projects, 2 of them have red highlights and red coloring in the portfolio itself. Could be a personality thing, but could also be a little bit calling too much emphasis into that. Again, too much process, in my opinion. I want to see more of visual, because if out of here only this is the visual side. So notice where my scroll is, and notice how much I scrolled. Okay, this is also visual. Yes, this is also UI. And then there's again more UX and more UX, and this is the cover. So the emphasis seems to be like you're not really sure you want to be a UI designer. Seems to me that you're still trying to discover what you want to do. Moving on. Luana. Nice illustrations. Again, a little bit shy. They're even more shy here. I'm not really sure if this logo fits the style of these illustrations, but since it's so small, I can't really tell. Here the illustration is bigger, but again, it kind of looks different already from this one. So I would like to see consistency. Okay, sorry, these are different projects. Okay, that was my mistake. Let's look into each project in detail. Apologies for that. I was actually saying like, why are, because I was coming from previous project, I was thinking that I was still looking into one project. All right, then there's about me, and this is nice, more getting a little bit personal. I'm usually not very keen on seeing photos right away, mostly because I do believe that it biases people. But it's also gives also personal look into you. So at the same time, it's also nice. So it has pros and cons there. Okay, let's look into these nice soft illustrations. And too much text didn't breathe. I want to see your screens. Got it. Okay, I see lots of process, which is fine. And if I'm interested into your visuals, I will want to recruit you. I will look into those in more detail later. But my first thing, as you see, is show me your visual styles. Show me how good your UI skills are. So immediately here is like, why is this bar only here? Why is not split in half? Why is it so much towards the sides, the edges? We do have native patterns for a reason that usually behave in a very specific way. So if you get out of that, there must be a good reason. Then I see consistency in these icons, at least more or less. Their outlines, they seem to be all the same width in terms of outline. This search icon goes into that direction, but then this back arrow is completely different style. I would like to see consistency there as well. And then here you have one style, and here you have a very different style. Although this looks like a progress bar, which then needs to be maybe put into steps, like 1, 2, 3. So it doesn't look like, because here it kind of simulates this pattern, but the other way around. So it's a little bit confusing. It doesn't look like it's filled, half filled, especially because the label is on the left and the fill goes up to here in the middle. So this is the kind of UI, the visual design that I want to see perfectly done. Toucan Flights. This was the logo that called my attention because it's so distinctive that I'm curious to see if the UI fits it. And immediately this, maybe you will not end up with icons like this, but these icons are very thin and elegant compared to that toucan, which is quite different visually. Okay, here I can see it in detail. Nice, let's play it out. And see if there's anything here that could be interesting and useful. Okay, you have a horizontal scroll. And some, yeah. I might want to have this at the end after I've looked at the screens. Because now this kind of, you're actually calling my attention moving back and forth, but I'm not really focusing on understanding the screens. So this feels like a little bit of wasting my time here. I'm moving on, and I haven't seen any screens. Where are they? They're all in the prototype. I'm sure that you did it, so show them to me. This is something that I want to see. There's something else here that I didn't really understand. Okay, this is something that is not here yet. But cool, you have two projects. They're quite different. They could be a little bit more standardized, more uniform. This will be something interesting that will make this stand out even more. Moving on, let's look at Huta's portfolio. And so far, I don't see any questions. So let me know if there's anything that we should discuss or clarify from what we went through earlier. Okay, I see a very solid color choice, which is really well done. It's like money, it's solid, it's trustworthy, and like somehow like a bluish, calming, professional gray, and then a super conservative brown, which I really like as color choice, even though it might not be great in terms of my favorite color or anything like that, but I think it does communicate quite a lot of trustworthiness. Not really sure this contrast is the best. Why not using white icons the same way as the text? On the other hand, maybe the whole element being rounds a little bit too much. Perhaps only the icon could be even round, and the text could be a non-negative, because if you use white text on darker color, you end up in negative text, which is harder to read, so take that into account. Basically, look into your typography. This is also for all the previous portfolios that we've looked into. make sure that your typography skills are excellent. This is one of the hardest things to master as a UI designer. And as you see here as well, that the text is super separated. Why are these letters spread apart? It makes it harder to read. Why is the line height so tight? Why is even this line looks larger than this line? It looks like a mistake. So I'm immediately my attention, I'm not even reading the text, my attention just goes straight into the issues of like having a 2 and then B recorded. Like it looks completely random, and something went wrong with formatting here. And as you see, I haven't even looked into the text itself, read the text itself. I just was looking on the typography issues that were going on there. So take care of those. A very great trick that I have is whenever you have like a single word that is hanging here, which we call either orphans or widows, because one of them is when it hangs by the end of the line, the other one is when it starts the next paragraph. But when you have only one single word, there's a good trick which you can use if you're using a Mac. You click, instead of just pressing space between this off and time, you select Option and then press space, and then you have something that is created, which is called a non-breaking space. So if you have space for the 2 words, they will end up here. If you don't have space if you have space for only one of the words, both words get pushed together into the next line. So that's a neat way of controlling in a way that you won't have like an I or an and hanging here in the end of the paragraph. I use that all the time, even when sending emails. It's a little bit of a nerdy, super geeky thing, but it's actually like excellent typography skill set, in my opinion. And then I can control, especially in responsive websites, when you can't really control how the text will break, at least to ensure that nothing gets hanging there. Okay, so far I've seen user testing, which is great to show process. I mean, I'm not suggesting that we should hide all our processes, but what I'm saying is that's not the first thing that I'm focusing on, even though it is a good thing to have in the right order. So if I have time, I will go through that in more detail. If I just have like 50 portfolios to look into, I will just skim straight into the visuals, and then later look at the process if I have more time for that before interviewing the candidate. Okay, I already commented on this before on the very top. This is not really a desktop design, this is just a landing page, so don't trick me into that. The desktop design would be really this app responsive. I know that it says for a promo, but the first thing says desktop design. I'm not really sure also you need this box outside a box with a shadow down there. It kind of feels like adding too many elements that are not really so important. Okay, moving on. I really like this treatment, a little bit of going beyond and having the image continuing through the portfolio. This is nice attention to detail. This is what I would call really well thought through presentation. Maybe the numbers could be a little bit smaller. They're kind of clashing here in some specific cases. I've got a question from Jakob and a portfolio, so I'll try to rush those, although we only have 1 minute left. I see that most job listings I see in Northern California are looking for UX UI designers. Would you review portfolios differently for such roles? Absolutely. So this really depends on the company, right? So if I'm looking only at UI designers because I work in a big company and we have dedicated roles, in that case, yes, I will only look at the visuals as I'm doing right now over this webinar. If I am looking for product designers or UI/UX in a company that may not have as many designers as so dedicated roles, then in that specific case, I would look into both. But the reality is your job description will tell you much more about the role than the title. So look more into that. Look at what is required there. and showcase that in your portfolio, because that's exactly what they, if the job description was done properly, that's exactly what the hiring manager is looking to find in your portfolio. All right, I think this looks very minimal, very much more minimal than many of the note-taking apps that I've seen, in a really good way. So it's kind of strikes me as somebody who can do more with really less. So it's in a really good way. And this portfolio project also showcases that, although I see again issues with the clicks, the size of the elements, because my finger is not as small, and probably your finger is also not as small to be able to click on this comfortably without misclicking on an element that is next to it. So be very aware of that. As a UI designer, you need to be able to design things that are spaced out well enough in order for the user not to have to use a small little tip of their minimal thing, a smaller finger to access that that the interactive element. All right, let's look lastly at Sharon's portfolio. So we do have a Behance. Finally, we got actually one single Behance portfolio, which is something that I'm more than used to review. And normally I would actually start from the last one and to see an evolution, because I know that in Behance you end up with the last project first. So I will probably look into that. I like that it is nicely described. Everything is filled out. This skills section is also not very common to see. I usually just see the about me in the description there. So that's nice. This is something you can't really control, unfortunately, because that depends on the tools that you are using, and Adobe is sharing without you knowing or wanting to. Okay, this is, there's quite a lot of noise. I'm not sure that's a good or a bad thing. Here in the background. I'm not, it adds some texture, but I'm not really sure it's in a positive way. Because it kind of distracts me from this content, because it doesn't extend from the screen as it was in the previous designer's portfolio from Kuta, but it adds quite a lot of noise there. Okay, then this is probably the quote that I will read, because it is the biggest one and largest one and more emphasized one. Not really sure that's really the quote that you want me to read. And let's see that there's no more questions. And just trying to go through this quickly. This is what you call visual design. This is still sketches, but okay. And I'm trying to go through this quicker because we're already out of time. And okay, now I see some onboarding screens. Seems quite clear, quite straight to the point. I like the horizontal navigation. Consistent icons, although they're quite typical and maybe quite different. This setting icon is quite different stylistically to the rest of them. And I'm not really sure. I really like this settings icon. It's quite different, even though it might not be as recognizable. I assume it's a setting icon. That's at least what I understand from it. But then everything else seems a little bit more mundane, which is not bad. But then since I saw this, I would like to see the other icons in that direction as well. And yeah, these titles kind of disappear a little bit. They're quite, it feels like you're not really sure if you want to emphasize those titles or not, because they have really low contrast. And here there's quite a lot of noise, I would say. Okay, so if the previous was, I wasn't sure about noise, this one is definitely has a lot of noise. So I'm not really sure you need all of this semi-transparent image that I can barely see, but it harms the readability of the icon and the text on top of it. And persona process we've commented on this earlier. Let's go through. Yeah, this is actually the issue what I see in UI designers' portfolio, that I end up having to scroll quite far in order to really see any UI. So I start questioning if the person is a UI or a UX designer or is not sure yet. I like this quite a lot, that you kind of show me a mock-up, show me the fact that you end up putting your design in a screen, although there's some issues here with this line that is kind of cut out with a grayer element here. But I like that you show me the rest of the screen. How would it look like scrollable? And I don't need to look into a video, because I can spend my time and understand if I want to spend more time looking at this icon or at the elements here, I will do that on my own pace and not at the pace of the video that you make me watch. So this is why I like this representation quite a lot, although it could be a little bit larger. You could definitely scale this a little bit more. Then we have some tablet view. Although the screen doesn't seem to be the same, because here there are quite different elements. So this is a little bit confusing. Is it the same screen? Is it different? Perhaps this element is also a little bit too big. In a real UI, would you really put this element so large and kind of completely hide all your suggestions down here? I'm not sure. Probably that will not be the best design. Yeah, it does seem to be a pattern. Let me look at the last portfolio. Okay, here it's actually cleaner. Now certainly it becomes much cleaner, but until then, everything has a lot of background noise over here on the top level. So I would probably polish that, suggest to polish that. Nice, I see a grid. I see lots of sketches. There's lots of thought put into the process, which is nice to see. I see some selections and when things are used, maybe perhaps which sizes are being used would also be good to know in a typography style guide. I don't want to look into a lo-fi, but I already don't want to look into videos of final screens. Imagine looking into lo-fi screen. I would rather look into your visuals, specifically final visuals. Okay, this looks very interesting in the sense that it's quite a detail and very more complex exploration of the situation of what e-commerce is. It's not just a few screens with some filters, but it actually ends up exploring the problems a little bit in more detail, which is really interesting to see in a portfolio. And it tells me that you go a little bit deeper rather than just 5 or 6 screens that are pretty much the same across everybody else. And lastly, finally, much more contrast, which is also good. It seems to me like an evolution. If this was really the last project, it seems like your work starts evolving into a very different style, which is actually good, and a little bit more modern, more simple, more minimal as well at the same time. So this is nice to see. And I think that's all what we have time for. I hope Jakob is still around and didn't fall asleep during this last hour. Let me know, Jakob, if there's anything else that we should cover. I think that's about it. Yeah, so thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. That's all we have time for. I hope you enjoyed the session. Feel free to reach out, connect on LinkedIn. I'll be happy to hear your feedback on this UI portfolio review webinar. And yeah, please check out CareerFoundry courses if you're interested in learning about UI, UX, and explore and having a more refined portfolio reach out to CareerFoundry, where you can have the opportunity to expand on your skills there as well. Have fun, wish you a great day, and thank you all for